Okay, so I was trying to figure out who to talk about today. So I was thinking about speaking about Reb David Tzvi Hoffman, and I was looking at Reb David Tzvi Hoffman on the beginning of the story of the Chet, right? The original sin, as Christians would have it, the first sin by Adam. But I think we're going to have to save him for a minute because I realize he starts off with this introduction, which I think is very important. He asks a fundamental question, which is, when did the original sin happen? So when you read Chumash, when did it happen? What? When, not where, when? 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 From the Psukim, how do we know? From the Psukim, do we have any idea? Not a clue. And David Tzvi Hoffman starts off his introduction to the story of the Chet exactly that way. We don't know. We don't know. So and he says, one of the earliest sources we have, now David Tzvi Hoffman, we'll get a chance to probably see his Peirush more inside later this year. He's wonderful. David Tzvi Hoffman was probably the first really Orthodox rabbi to engage with modern biblical criticism, definitely Orthodox, right? Living in a world where Orthodox even meant something, meaning he's in Germany, right? He's living in the modern period. He's living in the 19th century. He has a PhD, which is quite rare amongst definitely Orthodox Jews 200 years ago. And he writes a Peirush to engage. So he's very aware of the literature, and he notes that one of the earliest sources we have, which is from the Apocrypha, it's not part of our canon, but it does exist as an early Jewish source in the Book of Jubilees, Sefer HaYovlot, suggests that the sin happened 7 years after Briat HaOlam. There's 7 years of Edenic peace, literally Edenic peace. You can't usually use the word Edenic in its literal sense. It's just an adjective that says it's like Eden. But no, this is actually Edenic. So for 7 years, there's peace. And there are a lot of early traditions that say it was X number of months, years after creation. And the support of that, obviously, is that Perek Aleph finishes Briat HaOlam. Perek Bet tells you Briat HaOlam again. And Perek Gimel tells you about the sin. So presumably, this happened. What? Right, it's not immediate. It's whatever it is. Right? Chazal have a very different interpretation. Right? Chazal claim that when did the sin happen? What? Yeah, very good. At the end of Friday, that first Friday, like day one, Adam's in the world, right? The perfect world of gan-eden lasts kama sha'ot, right? It lasts a few hours, and then everything collapses. Yes, Adam. I think it's the 10th. I think he's right. Like the 10th hour, and then meaning it's like they document every hour. There's the sin, and then there's the tshuva, and not the tshuva. Then there's the confrontation with God, right? But yeah, it's like the last few hours. The whole scene unfolds in the last few hours, going into Shabbos, the first Shabbos, and that's yeah. So I was listening to the Tikva podcast, where David Beshevkin, he's a professor, he's a director of NCSY Youth Outreach, something in New York, something like that. What? No, something, I don't remember exactly what, was talking about his book that he wrote called Synagogue, S-I-N, right, rather than, anyways, about the Jewish conception of sin. And he had a fascinating insight that I think, that I want you to think about. And he said, okay, what is at stake in this question of when the sin happened? Right? And he argued that everyone tries to figure out what the sin was. Right? What was the sin? Was it fundamentally about idolatry? Was it about hedonism? What was it, right? There's a lot of things mixed up in that. Right? What does it mean to want to be like God, right? Is it really idolatrous? Is it more, right, claiming the mantle of the ability to make independent moral decisions or theological decisions? Was it, as the Rambam has it, was it moving from the world of emet and sheker to the world of tov and ra by expressing forbidden volition, whatever, right? All types of things. But he actually thinks that it's very important not just to ask what was the sin, but to ask when did the sin happen? Why? Right? Why does he think it's so important?
It happens immediately, so it's almost like an intrinsic part of human nature.
Very good. Or I put it even stronger, right? I always thought what you said, but he actually pushed it farther, and I think he's right. If you think, right, one way of putting it is the way Yosef puts it, which is if you think it happened 7 years later, you're saying sin is not intrinsic to the human condition. And if you say, no, like man can't get a few hours without sinning, you're saying, no, this is really intrinsic to the human condition. But he argues that it's even more than that. Because what is happening on day 6? What is day 6? More generally, what is day 6? Day 6 of what? Of creation. What? Of active creation, right? So what he argues is maybe it's more than, it's not that it's part of the human condition. If Chazal insists that sin happened during the time of what Chaim very nicely calls active creation, it could be not only is sin intrinsic to human nature, but sin is intrinsic to creation. The notion that the world is not perfect, that there will be mistakes and the possibility of rectification, that's not just part of human nature, that was God's design of how the world should be, because he said, think about it. If man sinned on day 6, what is God still doing on day 6? What critically does God do at the end of each day? Vayar ki tov. God makes an assessment and says, this is good. Right? This is good. I agree. This is creation and I approve. So he suggests this very, and again, I haven't gotten a chance to read the book. I've wanted to for a while, but he claims it's in the book, so I'm sure it is in the book. He is the author, right? So I want to see it in the full version. But he claims, right, that Chazal are making a radical theological claim, not just that, yes, humans are fragile and fickle and will sin, but that God approves of the possibility of error and the necessity of the possibility of rectification, so much so that it is part of creation and God is willing to put his stamp of approval and say that institution is ki tov. Which is, I think, a fascinating thesis to think about. And then he suggests something which is, I think, also very suggestive. And again, I'm still at the point of digesting it. I haven't gotten a chance to read the book, but I think it's worth thinking about. Is that chet in Hebrew doesn't quite mean the same thing that it does in English, sin. Right? Chet, right? I mean, in Hebrew, we have many, as I just got a chance to look at the beginning of the book, where he said Jews are the Eskimos of sin, right? They have 20 words for snow. We have like 100 words for sin, right? Chet, pesha, avon, right? We are so into thinking about our errors that we have come up with so many nuanced words. But chet doesn't really mean sin as much as, it's not even failure, it's being off the mark. Right? Chet is to be off the mark. And therefore it encompasses sin and mistakes, right? Not necessarily of a moral failing. And therefore he argues that it's more than that. It's not just that sin in the sense of moral theological failing is intrinsic. It's that the notion that human beings will fail in right, in the morally charged meaning and not the morally charged meaning, and will be able to rectify it and fix it and grow from it. All of that by Chazal placing the original mistake in the hours of active creation and claiming that God still gives it the stamp of approval by Hitov. It's still before Shabbos when God says, yes, I'm completing creation, meaning God is still willing to go ahead, finish the world, and say, yes, I completed the world. It is now complete. And for Chazal, what is the last thing that happens before God says, yep, the world is perfect right now, is man messing up royally, right? The claim that emerges from this seemingly small detail of when this had happened is actually hiding such a radical theological claim about the nature of the universe. Again, not just the nature of man, but the fact that the universe, the world, needed the possibility of mistakes and rectification to be built into creation. Right? He claims that that's what Chazal are doing by placing this in, even though, again, is the Book of Jubilees, does it make a lot of sense? And 7 years later? Of course it does, because Perek Aleph and better creation, and in Pshat, the world is created and perfect, and sin comes later. But for Chazal to nevertheless go out of their way and say, no, Perek Gimel is happening simultaneous with Perek Aleph and Bet, even though it looks like it's not, is a claim to say that the reality of sin, of mistakes, the possibility of falling and getting back up is literally written into the fabric of the universe. God wanted that way, and without that, the world would not have been complete. So he thinks that's what's behind Chazal's claim, and like I said, I think it's a very suggestive argument that I'm still digesting, but at least I wanted to share it with you, because I really, when I heard it, I just had to, I stopped for, sometimes, very rarely do you just sit and, hear something and, you just stop and have to think. For me, when I had to think about that thesis, right, it's still processing, but I think it's definitely puts a new spin on a quite well-known story. Okay? It's 8:45.